Well, thank you, Maggie. It's indeed a privilege and a pleasure to speak with this group tonight. And by the way, happy St. Patrick's Day, and hope I'm not keeping any of y'all from partaking in the green beverages. But anyway, I've been a big fan of PFI for a long time. I was sharing with Maggie earlier that one of the things that I've done in my life, besides I have been a farmer, by the way, all my life, and that's all I really wanted to do. I've been passionate about it. But along the way, I was asked to start a young farmers program in my county, and also to be an FFA advisor. And this occurred in 1985, 1986, which happens to, I think, coincide with your founding. And shortly after I started the Young Farmers Group, and it was intended to, provide instruction and guidance and business development to our young farm families, and I became an adult farm family community. That I came across some information on Practical Farmers of Iowa, and I'll never forget reading about Dick and Sharon Thompson and eventually getting introduced to them soon after that PFI was founded, and I became very inspired. In fact, I honestly pattern our program after what PFI stood for and what they were doing, and I relied a lot on that information to base my curriculum on. And so I provided in-depth topical information to our farmers. I did a lot of business management. It was at a time that I remember writing a grant in 1986 and securing, I think it was 7 IBM PC 256K double floppy computers that I used to lug around from farm to farm to get people over the fear of using computers. And so those were the kind of things that I did, but kudos to you all. And I've followed, you quite a bit. And I have so much respect for Practical Farmers of Iowa. Along the way, just to share some other background about me, along the way, I became president of the Missouri Pork Producers Association that was actually the late 80s when I was still in my 20s. And it was at a time when there were 40,000 farms in Missouri that had pigs on them. So it was absolutely a family farm organization. It was truly farms recognized that pigs were the mortgage lifter, and as pigs, it was always something that I loved doing. It was my number one enterprise, and I love pigs. Of course, the times have really changed. I think we went from 40,000 farms that have pigs on them to probably make more like 400. And I'm sure that Iowa has seen that same kind of trend. And so I was always one that fought against that, I guess. The days when Premium Standard Farm came to northern Missouri, and our bankers were our university was actually taking bankers down to North Carolina to get them excited about that model. My county of Osage became kind of like it was a standalone county that still had this stronghold of about 200 pig producing families on them. And we were very resilient, and we kept, we believe that independent family farm pork producing was the way to go. And then 98 occurred, and when that happened, we lost, probably 3/4 of my fellow pork producers. And that prompted me to start the Missouri Farmers Union. I became the first president of that organization and was with that for about 10 years. And so I know a lot of your fellow Iowans, especially Farmers Union members, and got acquainted with even more PFI members during that time. So that's kind of the background, and we eventually got aggravated, I guess you might say, or disappointed. Let's use that word in strictly advocacy work, going to Washington, D.C. into our state capitol, and decided that I should do some demonstration and prove to the country or to farmers that a different model of producing and marketing actually works. And that's mostly what this presentation is about. Maggie, what do I got? I can't seem to, okay, I'm all right. All right, this is where it started. I think I was 2 years old at this time, and my dad said that was kind of a, it was his fault. He took me to the farrowing house when I was that age, and I fell in love with pigs, crawled underneath the nest with the pigs, and cuddled with the sow, and that was my first pig. I was at a young age, I was charged with the responsibility of taking care of the running orphan pigs, and eventually, when I was 8 years old, I got my first sow. Her name was Honeysuckle. And so I've always had, this is a true passion for pigs. I think I love pigs because they're so much like kids, curious social animals that are, very intelligent. I told you about kind of there were different, I guess, epiphanies in my life. One growing up and really falling in love with pigs. Going to college, and with the only one thing on my mind was to learn things about pig production and doing it the right way and bringing that home, because that's all I really wanted to do, was to come back and pig farm. And then realizing that that I brought back some industrial ideas from college that, shame on me, and talked my dad into expanding some and going into more intense type pork production. Long story short, it culminated, it came back to haunt me in 1989. I actually contracted a disease from a boar hog that bit me from my practices of feeding antibiotics every day at a low level. I actually produced superbugs on my farm. I didn't know it. I knew that I had an extreme amount of problems with different diseases, ranging from strep to diarrhea to breeding diseases to respiratory diseases, and found out later on that it was caused by antibiotic resistant microorganisms. Came back to haunt me, and I nearly died after 7 or 8 different antibiotics with no sign of improvement, and my condition going systemic. I finally figured it out by looking at my lab reports from the state veterinarian's office on my pigs. And I realized, or I theorized, that what I had was a form of strep. And of the 10 different antibiotics that they tested the sensitivity on, there was only one that worked, and that was a drug in the cephalosporin family. Some of you livestock farmers might be familiar with a drug called Naxel. And I showed that to my doctors, and they took a sample, and sure enough, I had this rare antibiotic resistant bacteria that infected me, and the only drug that could save me was this, and they promptly put me in the hospital and gave me an IV dosage of that, and it saved my life. And so there was an epiphany there. I changed, while I was in the hospital bed, I plotted out a whole different course. And it really mimicked, this was 1989, and so it mimicked a lot of what I had read from the Thompsons and from Practical Farmers of Iowa. I had a farm that I had purchased from my great aunt. It was a heavily wooded, isolated farm with lots of natural barriers of hills, rocks, and trees, and that's where I started my operation. I had exterminated my diseased animals and kept back, because I saved back some heirloom genetics and embryo transferred those into some extremely clean hogs that I got from Nebraska. And then I plotted a course of more outside production, more natural grains with fiber and healthy practices, including never ever using antibiotics again. And so I'll have to knock on wood. That's been over 30 years now. And I've not had to use any therapeutic or subtherapeutic antibiotics during that time. And we'll talk about a little bit about how those practices are maintained. And so you got to know, 1989, I hadn't heard of, there wasn't any Nyman Ranch, for instance. There wasn't a Whole Foods. I hadn't heard of organic agriculture. I didn't know any of this stuff. All I knew that not using any antibiotics at that time, that first year, it saved me like $17,000. and for a small farm like I had, that was a lot of money. I saved $17,000 on vet visits, on antibiotics, drug usage, and dragging off dead animals. And also, it was so much more enjoyable. It was freaking me out back in the confinement days that every single day I'd have to go in and 3 times a day with a pistol grip syringe and treat pigs and dragging a lot of dead pigs off. So this type of agriculture was so much rewarding and fulfilling. But I didn't do it, and there wasn't a market for it, wasn't a premium anyway, and I didn't know how to capture that premium. I didn't even think about it. I just knew that I was making more money and I was more satisfied. Well, then 1998 occurred. 1998 is when we had Depression era pork prices. And I remember, basically my story is one night I traded a butchering hog to a guy. I was waiting in a tavern to meet some friends of mine. And I traded a case of some pretty cheap beer for a butchering hog, 250-pound live weight butchering hog, because that's basically what it was worth. And we both got, the guy that bought it was happy, and I got a lot of relief that night. And so things were bad. I sold some pigs or some fat hogs for 7 cents a pound, and just horrible. And again, we lost a lot of, at least 3/4 of our good producers in my county. And, myself and friends, we were passionate about raising pigs. We loved it. And we thought this was the end of the world. We knew that packers could do this again. They did it in the first place because they could. And so that prompted me to read about what was going on in Europe. And they were doing something different in marketing. I didn't know quite exactly what, but it prompted me to put together kind of a team of 4, actually 5 of us all together, to go see what they were doing in Europe as far as this kind of marketing, because it seemed like those pig farmers and those farmers in general were doing quite well. And so I went to 3 countries, London, or landed in London, but we went throughout the United Kingdom. We went to Germany, and we went to Italy. So my first taste of what I call this relationship marketing. And basically what it was is that these shops, and by the way, Marks and Spencer is a pretty big deal now, but in Great Britain at the time, it wasn't that big. It was basically a department store, they're more of a corner department store where people went in and they had food there, and people would buy, basically what they needed for the day, for the next few days, and they'd come back and they were in walking distance and they would get some more. But what struck me was, first of all, that the attention and detail that they took to make the food section, that's the picture on the right-hand side, it was beautiful. And it was, something that you would be, I felt so good to be in there looking at this food, and then observing that they had, it was a region of origin. In other words, they made it very clear where this food came from, which country. They identified it. It was a very transparent system. The chain of custody was obvious. And this was in 1999. Excuse me. And certainly, because it was the European Union, they had foods from different regions of the European Union, but they placed all this emphasis on local. And they made it, they made this food look like $1 million. And then I got inspired by these pictures here. They made farmers look like rock stars. And this was my first exposure to this kind of connection, that they were connecting farmers with consumers, and consumers were, like they were putting them on a pedestal and putting giant pictures in the food sections of this farmer. He happened to be somebody that I related to and contacted later, a pig farmer in Oxfordshire for 25 years. And he was growing pigs, outdoors, and he had a great story. And like I say, people related to that. I also noted that the packages had the number of the farm, and had an indication of what pig that it came from and what abattoir, the slaughter plants that this pig was processed in. So I was very impressed by that. Again, I said, this is a relationship I haven't seen in the United States. I mean, I remember when I was president of the pork producers there toward the end of my term, getting angry because we were promoting pork in St. Louis, and I went in the back of the store to get some more pork, and it was provided by Cargill. And here they were making that connection. And by the way, people were paying a nice premium just to know that they were buying this pork that had the identity, and they felt good about buying it. This was another photo that I got of an older gentleman, and you could tell he's so proud of his cattle. But you know, when consumers in Great Britain saw pictures like this, they trusted it. They identified. You know, I always said that I realized then that in the UK or European Union that people would pay a premium for it, and they demanded food that they knew, you know, who produced it, you know, where it came from, and how it was produced. Tesco was another, you know, is another chain of stores, and again, back then in the day, it wasn't quite so big. We did go to some smaller shops, but Tesco had already started a huge connection, and were extremely active in engaging their farmers, interacting with farmers. They started, I think, 16 sustainable farming groups. And the purpose was to, you know, to get them all the education that they needed, and to build a relationship. But also a big thing that really perked my interest is that they were determined to pay the farmers a fair price, you know, every single day, every single month, every single year, a price that was a living wage, and not to exploit them when commodity prices were low. And I'll show you a chart later on when I talk about fair pricing for farmers. But I was very intrigued by that. I had just started to learn more about sustainable agriculture, and we know the three, you know, the three legs of the stool. But certainly they knew that if they didn't have economic sustainability among their farmer suppliers, that they weren't going to get the food they wanted. So I always felt that this was a great model, and was something that I brought home with me. Went over to Germany, and my roots are in Germany. In fact, I met a Kremer, one of my relatives, on accident. We landed both in Frankfurt and Hamburg, and near Hamburg there's a village called Osnabrück. And so the picture on the right-hand side is kind of the architect that Osnabrück is noted for. But the reason that I landed there, I had been kind of a pen pal after 1989 with a retired veterinarian. His name was Dr. Bader, B-A-D-E-R. And he was a retired veterinarian that started a cooperative of producers to produce antibiotic-free pork. And I said, well, hey, that's what I'm doing. But they not only started this production cooperative, but they also owned a nice processing plant in partnership with the butchers. And the butcher shops in Germany, at least at that time, where most of the meat was being sold. And so I you know, learned some things from him, and so I went over there and I studied a few days with Dr. Bader, and he took me to some of the facilities. And by the way, those of you that have been on German farms know that the barns are attached to the houses, and I was so impressed that none of the living quarters smelt of pigs, and while right next door they had 200 sows that were nursing piglets. And the other thing that was that struck me was that almost all of the 100 farms that they had enlisted in this co-ops were owned, run, and managed by women. And the women were certainly the best caretakers in this type of setting. So we went to the processing plant as well, and there I got inspired by what they were doing on value-added production. And it wasn't just smoking ham and bacon, but they were taking you know, trays of portion control meat, and already then putting the spices in the little packets of marinade with that pork, and adding value to it. So this antibiotic-free meat, you know, that is back in 1999. You know, they had a great market for it, and these farmers in turn were receiving again a good profit above the cost of production every year. And they were actually expanding their herds. And so I was very impressed by that. On to Italy, again, this was the same trip, and chose Italy because, or the Parma region, because I started learning about these prosciutto hams and what they were doing in Parma and what kind of money Parma ham was fetching in the United States. And just a beautiful area that, that actually reminded me a lot of Osage County, where I'm from. I'm from this little town called Frankenstein. And you can see, and actually in Frankenstein, Germany, it looks very similar to that too, with a kind of a burnt out castle on a hillside like that, that actually inspired Mary Shelley to write the book Frankenstein. So I do have some connections with the monster, by the way. And so, but it was here in this community, I guess I fell in love with this area. I always said that I would never, ever, ever leave Frankenstein. I'm a 5th generation farmer from that area, and believe that I would, be born, raised, and would die there. But I fell in love with Italy because of the culture, because of their respect for not just people and community, but respect for food as a function of life rather than a fuel, as many of us Americans have treated it. And so we went around the countryside to first of all, to understand the way of life, why people respected each other, took the 2-hour lunch breaks, enjoyed the local wine, cheeses, and prosciutto ham. And then my main emphasis in college was genetics, and that's where I, soon after, started developing a lot of heirloom lines and breeds. I wanted to see what type of hogs and breeds and farmers were actually raising this prosciutto ham. On the right-hand side, you can see the stacks of prosciutto hams. By the way, back in that day, they were actually, most days they would roll these trolleys outside, out on a courtyard, so that the prosciutto hams could naturally air dry in the seasons. It's kind of principles of dry cured ham or air dried ham, is that it goes through the different seasons. And so I don't think that we could do that today with our USDA standards, but was very impressed by that. But the hog farms that we went to, I had noticed that they were larger framed animals that didn't mimic or didn't resemble any of the commodity hogs that we see in the United States today. In other words, they were long and tall and long necked and long headed, very fluid about their emotions and actions, and had this long flat ham, and then they raised them to about 375 pounds before they harvested them. And so I had the type of the design of the hog that I always liked was that design, and that was the kind of genetics that I had back home of different heirloom breeds, and so that was very interesting. And so I, made the connection there, got to learn a little bit about the trade. Again, this was an all natural thing. They, basically you start with pork and you add salt, and you let it time. A lot of these hams were air dried for right at 18 months. And a lot of it was exported to the United States. Any questions so far about that was, I guess that's where the relationship marketing started with me. By the way, I never, when I grew up, never intended to get into marketing or running a pork company, but it was something that I felt I needed to get involved with, and so that's why I took the trip to the European Union. So I was all excited and inspired, and so I came back with, I took all these ideas, the relationship marketing, the cooperative aspect, and the value-added production. I guess those were the 3 major categories of learning from those 3 different countries, and took them home. And I actually started, we started a cooperative that became, actually, the name was Heritage Acres. And that was in 2002 when we got it launched and off the ground. I put together enlisted a group of 52 farmers, like-minded, that were pig farmers that had experienced or that felt the same way that I did after 1998. They had a passion to build something to bring their interested sons or daughters into the business with them. And that was the unselfish approach that they took. And so started Heritage Acres as a cooperative, and and by the way, the USDA told me this after the fact, but we called them the class of '99, and that's when we actually that's when we started the process of going through the business planning and the equity drives. And in 1999, USDA told me there were 72 attempts in the United States to start pork cooperatives. And some of them got to the fundraising stages. Some installed out. Some of them got to got facilities built or bought and went broke after a couple of years. And basically there's only like two businesses that survived that class of 1999. And we changed different business structures, but we were one of those. And so, what eventually evolved into Heritage Foods. Heritage Acres, again, was a cooperative. We made some great strides in production and marketing, but business management and keeping our money together was a challenge. We actually purchased a slightly used small plant that could do 100 hogs per day in South Central Missouri, near the in the Ozarks, and we eventually sold it and focused more on value-added production. In 2007, I met up with a guy a family by the name of Gatto. They were from California. They owned Columbus Sausage Company. Their family decided to sell that business. Phil Gatto, the president, it was against his wishes, basically, and he was actually a good friend of Bill Nyman. And he was just about ready to start a kind of relationship with Bill Nyman, and that when this company fell through, so he came out to the Midwest and for a couple of years and tagged along with me. He found out that I was a guy that had a passion for organizing farmers and paying them the right way, and also knew some things about pork marketing. And so we teamed up for a couple of years, and I finally asked him whether he'd provide his skills of marketing, business management, and also maybe finding us some money to fund our venture. And he agreed, and so we basically collaborated, and Heritage Foods LLC now is what became of that. And I call Heritage Foods a vertical community of sustainable farmers, artisan processors, managers, and marketers. So we're basically a value chain that bound and determined to keep it authentic and real. In other words, keep out the big money and the big corporations. Make it so transparent from the way that farmers raise their pigs, how they're processed, all the way through the system, and then find strategic customers at the end that want to partner with us as strategic producers and processors. And that's basically what we have built since 2009. We have a passion in it, and it's a true passion that we maintain close, and that is we want to provide our consumers with the safest, most wholesome, best tasting pork, while being considerate to the welfare of the animals and protecting and enhancing the environment and community. Again, a lot of these things that I was inspired by the Thompsons back in the day, that, hey, this makes sense to do things more sustainably friendly to the environment. And, people that are truly passionate about pigs, I know you hear that term a lot, but if they're truly passionate about pigs, you truly are passionate and considerate about their welfare. Keeping the hogs out of crates and giving them access to the outdoors, feeding them a wholesome diet, and handling them and respecting them all the way to the point of when they meet their maker. And that's what I feel that we do in our system. Why we are different, and there's been some great meat co-ops and meat networks that have formed since us, and but our sustainable farmers do have that passion for raising hogs the right way. And one of the things when consumers ask me, and I'm on not just tours, but I'm in stores, and I speak before a lot of consumer groups. And I say we want to raise them the right way. And the reason that, and I say I feel that we're quite efficient because we we don't ignore technology or information, and we're not laggards. We do embrace that, but we also know that to raise hogs the right way, that we have to give a lot more tender, loving care and hands-on management. And so we can't have as many. And if you're going to raise hogs without antibiotics, you can't have as many, and you can't have them in concentrated areas, and you got to have them in areas that you have these natural barriers. And so if we're going to spend that, excuse me, that kind of time, and if we also want to make this enterprise attractive to the next generation, then we got to have, we got to have a little more premium. And that's what we've been able to find with strategic customers along the way. We call our systems vertically coordinated from seed to plate, and as opposed to vertically integrated. And we do, most of our farmers raise their own feeds, but we do buy some from our neighbors. Most of the time we have alliances with our neighbors. When I talk about the pricing model is set up so that you don't exploit the crop farmer either. You pay the crop farmer a fair wage, and so that, and you pay and we focus, or we emphasize local. So our system doesn't mandate, for instance, a breeding stock company. We don't mandate a feed company. We don't mandate a seed company. We don't mandate a vaccine company. What we do have are very, very high standards that they must abide by, that if they're going to buy when they buy these inputs, they have to satisfy these standards. And we have, we have a field team and audit system in place to make sure people abide by that. And so I'm really proud of that, and it works. We successfully built this with strong, authentic relationships. I can't use the word relationships enough. I believe that of anything about sustainable agriculture, I believe that relationships and community may be the most important aspect. When people also ask me, when consumers ask me, how do you know these farmers abide by these standards? And I said, because I know every one of them. I recruited every one of them. I break bread with them on a monthly basis. I call them. I know their families, and I said, yep. Can people cheat? Yes, they can. But I will tell you that I know these people personally, and they wouldn't do that. We believe in follow principles of an equitable food and farming system, righteous food. That includes the labor, even labor in processing plants. The reason that we wanted our own processing plant, and the reason that we're still working hard to have our own processing plant, is because we wanted to control that aspect, including dignity to the workers that work there, dignity to the animals that are processed through there, and in making sure people are treated fairly along the way. I will tell you that the Heritage Foods, the company itself, it makes some money every single week while paying farmers a good wage. We want, we need a healthy company that is responsible for the logistics and marketing and sales and research and promotion. And so we're quite proud that we built a very strong value chain. You guys probably even wrote this text, so I'll go through it pretty fast. But it's something that I believe in strongly. We believe that, we restore profit opportunities for sustainable beginning and limited resource pork producers. And that's who I started with. That's who I recruit. That's who I work with. By the way, when we have gatherings, and we have educational gatherings similar to PFI of our pork producers, most of the time, I would say 1/3 of our attendees will be younger than 25 years of age. These are either farmers that are currently farming for us or the farmers in waiting that come to our meetings. And usually we attract about 120 members at these gatherings. Ensure consumers a safe food supply. We think that the type of production and the processing that we do is what this country needs. And Maggie and I were talking about the state of the coronavirus situation, and I said, one of the things that's going to happen, it will awaken us that we have weaknesses in our food and agriculture system, and hopefully, turn that around to a more regional safe system. Advance environmental quality, improve the quality of life for our communities. By the way, none of our operations are considered CAFOs. They're deep bedded composted manure, that are diversified farms that reapply the manure, and you know, we're practicing regenerative agriculture as much as we can. Eventually, that's going to be one of our strict standards, and hopefully, I can learn some things from PFI as well in that matter. This is something that that I pushed, and that coincided with what was going on in California. Since my partner, the Gattos, are from California, they had a lot of field staff people in California, in Southern California, both, that would work the stores. In other words, they would be, you know, at the stores promoting our products. And this was about 2012 as well, that there were, you also remember, there were a lot of pieces of legislation that were being attempted to pass that would ban, you know, either ban GMOs from counties and states, or, you know, or require mandatory labeling. And they found out that consumers were, even at that time, though the awareness was more that GMOs were bad, and non-GMO meant more, or as much or more to them as even organic. And so that was the buzz. And so we had consumer support. And at the same time, you know, I was working with our farmers. I had, by the way, have never allowed, you know, I bought my farm in 1981, never have allowed a genetically modified seed be planted on my farm. And because, you know, for various reasons. And we had a lot of farmers that were fundamentally, religiously, and culturally opposed to genetically modified crops as well, including a lot of Amish and Mennonite people. And so Phil and I talked quite a bit about this issue. And I said, you know, I think we should do it regardless of whether we get promised a higher premium. Whole Foods was one of our anchor suppliers at the time, our customers at the time, and still are, and they were very good to us. So we had meetings with them, and they said, yeah, eventually we want every single product in our store to be, you know, non-GMO Project Verified. And we'd love for you to take the lead in that. We think you're going to get a premium, but we don't know for sure. So we did it in blind trust. In 2012, we made that decision that all of our producers would go non-GMO fed production. And eventually we got there in 2015. It fit very well, especially in Missouri, where I'm located. I'm located in the foothills of the Ozarks, and we have farmers in the Ozarks. We have farmers in the eastern Kansas, Arkansas, southeastern Illinois, but very conducive to growing GMO crops. Because, and when I say that, I mean that a lot of them, you know, already are sowing small grains and using those small grains in the rotation. So small grains such as wheat, oats, barley, and rye are already, you know, are all non-GMO. And then also we're in a great area where grain sorghum exists. I'm a big grain sorghum fan. I feed grain sorghum barley and wheat rather than corn. And so we had that supply there already. The biggest challenge was protein. And I talked a couple of friends into establishing some micro extruded expelled soybean processing for soybean meal. And so in the end, I guess we were noticing this as I got more and more people doing this. This was before we actually went to non-GMO Project Verified, that when I had farmers switch to non-GMO feedstuffs, that, you know, they were seeing healthier, thriftier, more productive sows and pigs. And they were experiencing less death loss. And you can read the research. There's 42 different research that show that genetically modified feedstuffs, you know, cause everything from stomach ailments to reproductive failures to enlarged organs, and compared to non-GMO. You know, some of the theories is that, you know, like for instance, BT corn, for instance, can since it's a kind of a natural insecticide, can screw up the microflora of the gut. And we were seeing a lot of skyring activity with especially our weaned pigs. And when people switched to non-GMO corn or milo, it immediately stopped that. We also have had, again, most of this is anecdotal information, farmers that swear by that their fertility rates have improved by as much as 30% since switching. A lot, and then pig growth as well. A lot of this has to do, I feel that a lot of our farmers went more to traditional grains, and you might call them somewhat ancient grains that were selected for quality and nutritional value rather than strictly yield. The other thing that I think made a big difference is that instead of buying soybean meal from a hexane extracted plant where they extract most of the oil, almost all the oil out through hexane solvent extraction, the soybean meal was being processed by these more of a natural expeller press process and had more oil in it. And so I think that contributed to the increased growth of the pigs as well. So we are non-GMO Project Verified. I can safely tell you today that we are the largest in the country. I'm not bragging that we're large. I'm just kind of disappointed that that not many of the other pork groups have followed our lead, and it's something that I'm very concerned about. Because even Whole Foods, since been being bought by Amazon, are questioning whether non-GMO pork means much to their consumers. And so that's something that I'm working on right now. Speaking of Whole Foods and market relationships, I guess that's something that I'll have to tell you a story that as a co-op, we had raised some money, and we knew that marketing and sales was an important aspect. We were trying to tell the story, trying to sell our product as a differentiated product, and so sales and marketing was very important. So we hired a hotshot salesman, paid a lot of money for him, and after about a year, realized that we weren't making any headways. And so I decided then, I reflected back on my European trip, and I said, you know what, these customers and people buying our pork, they want, I think it could be the same thing in the United States as it was in Europe, but they want to build that relationship. They want to hear the story from the farmer. They want to do business with the guy, the people that actually raised this product. They want a trusted, long-lasting relationship. And so I started going out and knocking on doors. So I knocked on the doors of the, remember we had, at the time, 52 producers. And so we had some volume. We did do some very local stuff, and we did some door-to-door things. We did some friends and family things, but I knew that we had to have some anchor customers that were going to buy larger quantities. So I knocked on the likes of Whole Foods. There were a couple of distributors in New York, Chef's Warehouse and D'Artagnan. D'Artagnan was served all the French restaurants, and then Chipotle. So Whole Foods was one. After it took a while, but they met, and they liked what they saw. They liked our little plant, and so we struck up a relationship in 2005. They especially liked the fact that we were farmer controlled. And so we've worked with them since 2005. They've been a good partner. We probably put too many eggs in their basket. At sometimes we have as much as 50% of our production in their basket. We're in about, I think, 4 different regions. And they embraced the idea of the non-GMO pork. And so they start handling that pork in 2015. You can see one of the things I like about Whole Foods is they do tell the story. The signage, for instance, like you see on the right-hand side, but because our meat is in the full serve case, the people are trained to tell that story, and they know the story sometimes better than our producers, I swear. One of the other things they do, because they do take our bacon, for instance, that they consistently utilize 65% or more of the hog carcass, and sometimes that gets about 75%. And then we do have markets for the rest of the pig. Chipotle was one too. I mean, I talk about relationships. When I was with Farmers Union, I'd have my executive meetings in Denver, and Chipotle's headquarters was in Denver. And back in their early days, I thought, I'd go over there, and I'd literally go over unannounced, and I'd talk to some people and say, we really have a great product. I wasn't making any traction. And finally, I think this was about later in part of 2005, I get this phone call from Steve Ells, the CEO of Chipotle. And he says, Russ, I heard all about your story and about what you're doing, about your producers and where you're from and your hogs and everything. And I'm flying around, I'm flying my corporate jet out of Chicago, and I'd like to meet with you. And so I see that you're from Frankenstein, Missouri. Could you see if you could get clearance to land my corporate jet at the Frankenstein airport? Well, Frankenstein is population 30, and there's hardly a level spot in that area to land a house flight, nonetheless a corporate jet. So I made arrangements for Mr. Ells and his entourage to land in Jefferson City, our capital, and picked him up. And we came to Frankenstein, my hog farm, and the different area farms. And he fell in love with the area, the pigs, the community, and how we were treating our pigs. And he's been there a couple of times, and we've become actually very good friends. We've actually jointly testified before Congress on the antibiotic resistant issue. Well, anyway, the picture on the left is from that Back to the Start video that I think it debuted at the Grammys. And I didn't know this until later, but then Steve Ells personally told me that I was the one that inspired that cartoon depiction. And that's the one they have Willie Nelson singing the Coldplay song, The Scientist. And it's got a lot of hits, and I'm very proud of that, because it talks about the transition of this farmer who started out in a sustainable fashion in the community like I did. And then he got caught up in the industrial age, and his pigs started getting sick. And he was so remorseful and sick about it that he basically, tore down his confinement buildings and started new, and started back to the start. That's basically the thing. And so I'm proud that I provided him some inspiration to that. Anyway, Newsweek did an article on Chipotle, and it was basically the centerfold was what you see on the right-hand side. Those are my pigs. By the way, this particular version was sent to me from some Japanese friends that I know that we were selling pork to, and it was they bought it on the newsstand in Japanese, so it's in Japan. But the story's about my pigs, how I met Steve Ells, and how Steve Ells in Chipotle was changing the fast food business, so to speak. I know that sometimes Chipotle's been under fire with some of their practice. I will tell you that as far as any restaurant chain of their size, they truly are credible. They believe in equity. They believe in, they have a lot of scruples, and they just have the problem is they have growing pains because they grew so fast. So anyway, that been a great relationship with Chipotle. We don't always supply Chipotle. They want butts and parts of the ham, so it's limited quantity as far as the pieces of the hog. But anyway, it's been good to strike up that relationship and see what Chipotle has done. By the way, Chipotle, or Steve Ells, he was had such convictions about food. Righteous food, that he was using organic and humanely raised animals at the very beginning, and not even advertising it, because he wanted to make sure that he had the supply chain built up before he even told people. But he paid more money for it, even though that he wasn't advertising it as such. This is actually these are my pigs, and so you'll start to get a flavor of my pig farm. And this was actually in the December of 2019. So this past Christmas edition of Eating Well magazine. And they did a story about my pigs and me, and I provide hams, for instance, to LaQuartia, which is in Norwalk, Iowa, just south of Des Moines. Some of you people might be familiar with that. And LaQuartia has been a great strategic partner for a long time. What we call strategic partners, by the way, or strategic customers, are those customers that actually believe this and live this, that the producers, the farms that raise this and raise it to the standard need to make a living, and that they're willing to pay the price week in, week out, and basically buy about the same quantity, about the same type of materials, because they want that farmer to survive. Even though commodity prices, by the way, are about half the price of what we're actually selling today for, they're sticking with our model. And truly, there are strategic customers out there that are doing that. You know, Whole Foods has done it, Chipotle's has done it, LaQuartia, D'Artagnan. They have been with us for, you know, like I say, 10 to 15 years. Again, this was in the magazine. This is the inside. This is, my pigs have access to deep bedded buildings as well as the pastures and the woodlots, and I'll go more in detail into that later. And value added partners. These are two brands that are actually based in California that are also affiliated with Heritage Foods, True Story and Fork in the Roads. You'll find True Story branding in the Midwest in hams and hot dogs and smoked sausages. Fork in the Road Foods is actually an exclusive brand that Whole Foods uses, and so you'll see that brand. So this will be pork from our hogs in our cooperative system. Just a little bit about heirloom pork. That's what rather than a lot of people call it heritage and things like that, but I call it heirloom because it's pork produced, processed, and marketed by, you know, the authentic people, you know, authentic artisan methods, and the quality has this very distinctive, different quality traits. And these traditions and methods are handed down from previous generations. You know, I learned from my grandpa. I read books from the 40s, and then I tried to apply some modern technology and information. But basically, our pork is raised like grandpa used to. And I always tell people when they say, you know, what's the key to heirloom pork? What's your secret for this great pork? And I say it's the breed and the feed and the need for tender loving care, patience. In our cooperative system, we do have a Berkshire program, but we use heritage breeds or heritage genetic lines. In other words, you know, the Duroc and the landrace even that I use. I started an heirloom landrace line back in the mid 70s. So they're older lines that were, you know, used to the outdoors, and they had this free, easy movement, that were hardy, that could withstand the outdoors, and by the way, could raise pigs without the assistance of crates. So we have preserved those lines. Most of our lines can be traced back genetically for 60 years. And we use Berkshire, Tamworth, we used a lot of Duroc, the old tough Duroc, and then like say old lines of those white lines. You know, common traits of heirloom pigs, as I just mentioned, they can thrive out in the outdoors. You know, there's a superior immune system, great mothering ability. And by the way, those traits are number one to us, meaning that what drives us as producers, we want to do things humanely for the benefit of the animal. And so part of the humane treatment is selecting the right breeds and genetic lines, because the breeds today are selected where the selection pressure is, you emphasize efficient lean meat, then you get pigs that are not structurally correct. They carry around this big bulky muscle, and it's actually, in my opinion, in many cases, inhumane. And by the way, and I've told, actually in the meat sciences too, but when you put all these things together, it's kind of like, if you want good meat, you don't have any stress, fear, or pain. And that's my goal every day in my animals. No stress, no fear, no pain. And by the way, when you do that, and you follow through on the plant level, then you have superior meat quality as well. And when I talk about superior meat quality, I'm not talking about low back fat or tremendous long, about abundance of marbling, a nice, a nice cherry red color, an ideal pH that enhances shelf life and minimizes that purge that's in your packages, a juicier, more flavorful pork. These are all the eating qualities that we've proven time and time again that we've won taste tests even in Japan, and they're very discerning there. This is a showcase. This is actually, by the way, in Hy-Vee stores in Missouri and Kansas. These are actually my woodlot raised Tamworth that they featured, and you can see the quality of the meat. I wish I would have had contrasted that with the regular commodity meat, it being more pale in color and a lot soggier in texture. So this is what we want. You know, a nice cherry red color, not pale stuff, not white stuff, a nice white fat cap, firm. You'll see the marbling is very good. By the way, I apologize for the glare on some of those packages. A nice size loin. Very proud of this meat. And you know, this was by design. One of the things that I'm keen on as a meat scientist is healthy fats. And so not only have these pigs been grazing on acorns, but they eat the good stuff too, like high oleic soybeans, grain sorghum, wheat, barley, things that actually enhance monosaturated fats and lower saturated fats. But very good tasting. This was a big hit with those consumers. Global Animal Partnership is about the humane treatment of our animals, and we've been with them. Well, they started, let's see, I think, if I remember, I think GAP was, we originally went with a standards of certified humane, and Whole Foods had one, and I think this was in 2009, I think is when GAP started. And we were one of the first producers. And so this assures the consumer that the animals are, you know, crate free, no antibiotics. Ours happens to be a GAP level 3+, meaning they have access to the outdoors. They have later weaning ages. All of our Berkshire producers are GAP level 3, for instance, so that's 6 weeks and older. Castration has to be performed really early. We don't do any other mutilization, including teeth clipping or tail docking or things like that. And so not all of ours are pasture raised. My farm is a pasture based system, but we're encouraging our producers to go higher up the GAP level. So the higher the GAP level, it's 1 through 5, the more enrichment and more things that we do to preserve the welfare of the animal. Mine is GAP level 4. You can kind of get a flavor of what it looks like. I'm in the Ozarks. I'm happy to be there because I'm by myself. There's not many neighbors, and I have a lot of natural barriers. What I also though do is I have good buildings. You see on the left hand side, this would be what people would call a double curtain sided building, similar to the style of a turkey building. My buildings are smaller though. I think this building is 80 foot in length by 35 feet. So I have natural ventilation, but very well insulated. So, I mean, it doesn't freeze in there. I have automatic feed systems, but then these pigs are allowed to go outside either on a patio. They can go out into the pasture. They can go out in the woodlots, or they can go into a muddy hog wallow. On the right-hand side, for instance, and we truly believe in deep bedded systems. I raise my own bedding here, and this is how our pigs stay warm in the wintertime. But our feed efficiency is quite well because and what I like about it, and I observe my pigs. I'm out there a lot. I understand they're like kids. I mean, if it's a sunny day, and even though it may be 10 degrees outside, they'll be outside as soon as that sun comes up. A lot of our farrowing is more Swedish style. That's not my building on the left-hand side, but we have I think maybe some of you may have observed what the Swedes are doing. I do this. We believe in communal lactation. I'm a big proponent of keeping pigs are communal animals. So the only time they're not communal is when they have pigs. And I have a lot of woods, and if my sow has a choice, she'll take off a mile and have pigs by herself, and then bring the pigs in. Then after that, we keep them communal. I try to keep my pigs in groups of about 80 and keep them in their contemporary groups from there all the way till they're hauled off to the harvesting plant. On the right-hand side, you can kind of see how happy these pigs are. Those are basically crossed heirloom pigs. I showed you this building before. There were deep bedded grow finishing facilities. Again, curtain sided. They have plenty of space. I allow my pigs at least 15 square feet per pigs inside, and all the space they need outside. Our standard is 12 plus, and the commodity is typically more like 8. On the left is a hoop building. We have a lot of hoop buildings in our system, and we get along great with those. On the right-hand side is one of the newest grow finish buildings that I built. It has a cathedral ceiling in. It's naturally ventilated, so there's curtains on each side. On the north side, I have it earth contacted, but then in the middle, it's like 4 foot of, the ceiling slopes toward this 4 foot of ventilation chimney. And it's a roof that's 512 pitch, so it's a steeper roof. I'm going to put some solar panels on the south side, but these pigs do great. I actually lie in here in the summer day, and it feels like air conditioning inside. But no, actually this will be a off the grid system. I do a lot of, I have a lot of woods. So 85% of my farm is wooded. And I have a lot of oak trees, hickory nut trees, walnut trees, and persimmons. And so I manage my forests. I do rotate some of the areas that have a lot of invasive species. I'll more intensively graze that and try to get rid of those, and then plant vetch and some other, and then some oak seedings. But these are my acorn Tamworth fed hogs. I'll usually have these in groups of 100, and they'll be on about 30 acres. And they'll be on acorns, as well as about half of their feed is that conventional feed ration I was telling about earlier. They'll be grazing acorns from July when they start falling, all the way through January. Kind of gives you more kind of the feel of my farm. They love the woods, and the pigs that was their native habitat, in the woods. I do also have some hillside pastures, and I plant some cover crops and I graze them. I'm actually doing this in cooperation with USDA, ARS right now. My brother is a soil scientist with them, and they're grazing rye and peas. That was last spring. And they'll be doing that again. So I put them in paddocks, and so that does reduce the need for feed, enhances meat quality, and it just keeps them healthier. But that kind of gives you an idea of how I do it. I think I already talked about the Non-GMO Project Verified. Actually, yeah, it was in 2012 we made that commitment, and then 2 years later, Whole Foods started buying it. Originally, I think somebody from PFI or somebody called me. I was awarded a SARE project to actually feed silage from high quality cover crops to hogs. I've done some of that in the past. My farm is basically in transition of organic, and here's what it takes. It takes, first of all, these heirloom crosses of hogs. They're the kind that can actually take these forages and roughages and convert it more effectively into meat, into growth. And then you need some high quality forages. The mixture that I planted last spring was a combination of oats and peas. So it's oats and peas. And then you got to cut it right. But I should show you the analysis. The analysis on a dry matter basis is almost exactly what I want for a complete feed. It's 14.3% protein. It's got about a 1% fat. I think that came from the peas. And the digestibility was awfully good. And so I fed this past fall and winter, and I'll be providing those results in my SARE grant. But I truly believe this is a way of reducing feed costs in a non-GMO and an organic program especially. And by the way, the silage equipment I picked up used for little or nothing money. So I planted the cover crops, and then later no-tilled. I think I no-tilled milo in last year, yeah.
I just want to interject real quick and let you know that we've got about 20 minutes left.
Okay. I'm finishing up, Maggie.
Great.
Yep. I got my little clock here. Thank you. I want to talk about this, and I don't have just a couple of slides on this, and I'll conclude my presentation, but you may have questions about this anyway. But what's near and dear to us as farmers is we have to make a living, and we're passionate about doing things right, but we need to get paid. And so one of the things that Phil Gatto was asking me when we went by a commodity farmer back in, I think it was in 2007, and he asked me what this farmer was making. And I said, that farmer today, I'm going to estimate he's losing $20 a hog. And he couldn't fathom that anybody in business would actually do it to lose money. So it inspired me to put together a cost reduction program. So basically what we do is we pay our producers when we do it once a year. I strike a price on November the 1st for the following year, and I look at the futures prices for corn and soybean meal, and I average all those up, and then that's what we on corn and soybean meal that's what we base our feed costs. We then average a basis to that and a non-GMO premium. And then we have discovery on the cost of utilities and things like that. And so the end that we pay farmers based on that cost production, and then plus a 20% return to labor and management. And the bar is pretty easy to get. A lot of our farmers will say that they're on a farrow to finish system, they make as much as $100 above feed costs, and they're very, very happy. We don't lose any of our producers, but we do that every year. And then if a young man for instance, needs to go to the bank, we can give them a multi-year contract based on that premise. So anyway, our big deal for me, because I was a teacher, I want to bring young kids in, if they so desire, give them that opportunity to do that. And this pricing program does that. This I think is my last slide. But part of the inspiration came from Tesco. Tesco in England, they have a cost production system for their dairy products. And that blue line is what they paid their farmers throughout the years from 2007 through January of 2016. And the red line is what the commodity price of milk was. And so you can see that most of the time it's quite a bit above that. So it's based on the cost production and in a return. And I think they have 600 milk suppliers, and they seem to be happy. So if we did that, and like I say, we make our prices for our grains, that we have basically a floor price on our grains, so that we can keep our neighbors that are strictly in the crop production as business too. I think if we could do that and practice those sustainable practices that PFI is teaching, we wouldn't need any commodity programs. Support itself. So thank you for your interest. This is one of my pigs. This is Oscar, and he says hello. So any questions?
Yeah, so we just had a question pop up. And the question is, if you have any information about planting rates, how you harvested stored grains, that would be great. I'm working on creating a planting plan right now for this next growing season, looking at peas in particular, and I've been finding good stuff about triticale. Have you grown that?
Yes, I have. I've grown that, and I've also grown the hybrid rye that I got mine from the place in Minnesota. Somebody help me out here. In southern Minnesota, that name of that town. Anyway, if you're familiar with that hybrid rye actually yields better, has a bigger grain. That's what I actually planted some of that last fall. I'll be harvesting that year with peas, and I'll certainly be glad to share that information. But it looks to me like the yield of the grain is going to be certainly greater. I think it's going to improve the energy of my silage, but that's my number one concern in a silage for pigs. And so I'm a little more excited about that than triticale. But I did have great luck with triticale as far as the volume of forage, but it did work really good with peas.
You just had two people chime in and say Albert Lee Seed is.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions? To submit questions, make sure you open up the chat box. To access the chat box, just hit the little word bubble in the chat icon at the bottom of your screen, there's a black toolbar. If you don't see it, you might have to hover your mouse over the bottom of your screen and it'll pop up. And then once you open that, you can submit your questions and comments. All right, so we have another question just came through. Do you think there's room in the market to create similar businesses to Heritage Foods, or should farmers consider selling into existing businesses?
Well, that's a great question. You know, to me, there's probably three options. And when I talk to farmers, you know, by the way, I'm not a very good salesman in this respect about, you know, recruiting for our system, but certainly there's room in our system. We are in, I think, 5 states, and we do have some producers in Iowa, Minnesota, and your kind of your trade area. But also, you know, but there's a lot of farmers that want to be more independent, and they want more margin. And I suggest that they can do that with a smaller niche market. I've helped some people set up in, for instance, in Tulsa and Memphis and places like this where, you know, where they find a processor and then sell it, maybe the whole hog, or have a series of restaurants that are strategic customers. And again, I'm going to emphasize strategic customers. It's because you need that loyal strategic customer base to buy the bulk of your product day in, day out. I really believe in that. I think you can get higher markups that way. We decided to do it, you know, I call our system collective entrepreneurship. Some people think that that's socialism, but I think it's a pretty good term. And so is there room in the marketplace? Yeah. I mean, but again, I guess I'll have to emphasize, make sure that you have your ducks in a row on the marketing side. I think that there's going to be more and more mid-sized chains of grocery stores that are going to be looking for that kind of relationship. You know, they want to buy the real thing. But I will tell you what, I mean, I guess this is my warning, or I guess I want to leave this discussion with this, is that I found that I pitched Costco once, by the way, in Seattle, and I did it twice. In other words, the first time was ahead of my time. I actually won the pitch, but they told me, they said, Russ, you got the greatest story, and your pork is beautiful. And I'll tell you what, if you could actually guarantee that kind of package, but consistent, dependable supply to fill our needs, we'll knock off all our commodity stuff and let you have this whole thing. So that's the emphasis: consistent, dependable supply. If you're a onesie twosie person that actually does your deliveries yourself and does all that stuff yourself, most of the people that I know, that they failed at that dependability and consistency test by not getting it there when the people really needed it. So, you know, whether you're going to do it on your own or whether you want to organize a group of producers and do that, you know, that's one message I want to really emphasize. The other thing too is, I think you all know that raise animals, that processing is short and none. And so I'm working real hard to establish a community-based processing plant. Looks like my group is going to get one bought here, but processing is just short. We need more custom processing. In Iowa, you guys got, you know, like a couple of them up in Sioux County, and one there near Des Moines. The plant that's actually owned by Purdue and Coleman, you know, they're growing like crazy, and so I kind of question how accessible that plant's going to be in the future years. So those are some of the things you need to consider.
Can I follow up on the processing? So you said earlier, when you were talking about the processing and labor considerations, you said labor is part of the reason we're still working hard to have our own processing plant. So what are the challenges with getting a processing plant up and going? Can you talk a little bit about the barriers that you're facing in your situation in particular?
Sure. The greatest barrier is finding is scale and scalability. And, you know, unfortunately, and I think in every business you have, there's always going to be some critical mass involved. And in finding that right size that doesn't compromise the integrity and the quality of the product. I think that size is probably around, you know, you can be as large as 1,000 to 1,500 per day. That sounds like a lot. I think that, you know, you can be as small as you know, as 100 to 200. But that's the tricky thing. And so if you get into a plant that's scalable, because in the end, there's a lot of processing plants that you're going to have as much as $250 to $300 in processing costs per animal, you know, where the standard, the commodity is about 10% of that. And no matter what, if we want to make this product more accessible and affordable to the masses, then we've got to look more at these community processing plants, in my opinion, that are more scalable. And so that is the number one barrier. And then having a management team. The reason that our plant, you know, nearly failed down in southern Missouri is because we couldn't find a manager to, you know, that was decent to manage a plant of 100 per day. They were used to either bigger or some were just these small walker plants. And so that was critical. I think in the rural areas that we're looking at, we have actually a availability of labor, a lot more than you probably even have in Iowa. In the Ozarks, we have people very interested in working these plants because we're going to pay them decent. So that part's not a barrier. So supervisors and management's a barrier, and then you know, putting the money together to build a plant that's scalable enough to make it somewhat feasible to produce a product that's affordable to more people.
Thanks. And then you just mentioned power and numbers, and that made me think about what you were saying with going to like mid-sized grocers, and you think that there might be an availability to get this type quality product on the shelves of those outlets. What would be the best approach for farmers that wanted to pitch that idea? Is that a power in numbers type of project too, where you really need a co-op to come in together and pitch that to mid-sized grocers, or is it just a one-off? Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I do. I think, you know, I think in most of those mid-sized chains that, you know, it would take, well, I take that back. There's still two approaches to that. And I'm familiar with a lot of them. I worked with a lot of them. There's more and more a lot of them, including Hy-Vee. I mentioned Hy-Vee, and you guys you're home. They're home to Iowa. They are, in a lot of their stores, they are featuring, you know, independent small family farmers products. And so, you know, they do have some Berkshire pork in there, for instance, in different areas. They do have some heirloom pork of other kinds. Where you know, a savvy individual, or, you know, a small group of individuals could approach Hy-Vee and tell them that, hey, this is the product that we have, or, you know, that we can produce in this kind of quantity. And, you know, if you can tell the right story and have the right quality in a retail ready format, and convince them that, you know, by the way, we got this processor and we got this logistics means of delivery, that you could get their attention. That might be a good way to start. And then, you know, later on, you know, approach it with a you know, an organized approach of, you know, grow your membership and say, oh, by the way, you know, we'd like to feature our product in all of your stores. And you're probably never going to, I guess I'm going to take this back. I do believe that some of these mid-sized chains, if you took the right approach in numbers, that you could get their commodity business. In other words, you could get them to knock off all the commodity stuff and feature that product as long as it's halfway affordable. I'll give you an example. Schnucks is headquarters out of here in St. Louis, and I've worked with them and have a great relationship with them. They have 100 stores, and they went entirely to certified Angus beef. And the reason that they did, because they wanted the quality. They wanted to be guaranteed that all that beef was at least mid-choice on up. And so it was more expensive. You know, it cost them at least $1 more a pound, but they were willing to do that, you know, in its entirety, just to have that secure supply of high quality meat. I think that we can do that with this type of niche pork, as long as we don't out overprice it.
Do we have any other questions from anybody watching? We've got just a couple more minutes left, so if you have any lingering questions, definitely pipe up now and get those in the chat box. I was curious while you were talking about, you know, how Heritage Acres and then Heritage Foods got started. Are you still bringing on new farmers, or what's the growth like in your farmer base?
Yes, we are. I mean, we're at we're about 2,000 hogs per week. Some of those are being supplied by some systems that are in transition, and by that they were, you know, like commodity operations, more confinement type, and they were larger and they're in transition. There's going to probably be a couple of those farms that, you know, that they say that we just can't raise these animals effectively with tails on them. And so I believe that we're going to be transitioning out a couple of those farms. And by the way, we have different avenues for this pork. We keep the chain of custody accurate. I'm saying that yes, we're looking for new farmers, good farmers that are passionate about doing it the right way.
How far and wide are your farmers based?
As I said, we started in Missouri, and so, you know, throughout Missouri, eastern Kansas, we have some in eastern Nebraska. In Iowa, we go all the way up to, you know, north of Des Moines. We don't have, I think we have like 3 or 4 producers in Iowa, and in Illinois we have, I think, 4. So we're pretty broad spread.
Yeah, great. Well, we're at our time, so thank you everybody for logging in to tonight's Farminar with Russ, and thank you so much, Russ, for giving us your time and sharing your story and insights. I think this is all really valuable. I learned a lot, and I hope that the attendees got a lot out of it as well. Oh, we just had somebody ask, is Russ's contact information available? Russ, do you have an email or anything that I'm going to send out a thank you email to everybody tomorrow? So if you have an email or some contact information, maybe you could share it with me and I could share it with everybody in that email.
You have that, you still have that email address we've been communicating with?
Yes, I can use that one.
Yep. Use that and use my phone number. Email and texting is the best. Phone calls, sometimes I just don't get. So I'd be happy to, and I'm really glad to be. I mean, it's always good to have an audience that believes in this sustainable and regenerative agriculture movement, and I applaud what you all are doing. And thank you for letting me be part of this.
Absolutely, we're happy to support your efforts.